but you might hear it differently.
Okay.
Much like me.
Sure. Lindenreich, you play with my notes, you know, and I wrote it on the sheets.
Hi. So this is how we connect with the operations upstairs. We look back at that camera, and if I say, are we ready to go, they can make that camera go up and down, affirmative.
Sort of like
Yeah, now they're going up and down. Or if I say,
Oh.
yeah, or if they're not, they can go this way. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so just a confirmation from the control room. Can you hear me well enough? I'm looking for an affirmative. You cannot hear me, or can you hear me? I need to put on a different microphone. Let's see what happens with this microphone. Can you hear me now? Looking for some sort of affirmative or negative. Can you hear me now?
Let's look at the camera's not on.
He's going, camera's going like that. That's so weird.
All right, how about now? Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Can you hear me now? Mic's on. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, if someone from the control room could come down and tell me what I'm doing wrong, that would be helpful.
There was a guy here just a few minutes ago.
Meanwhile, I'm going to turn the organ on. That would help. And Joe, I may ask you to play a bit of hymn 4 at some point in this. A bit of hymn 490, which is in D flat major.
Oh, yeah.
And it's
this one upstairs
and
last
we
week.
did, and it's going to sound not like $1 million down here.
Would you like it transposed as a juxtaposition?
Yeah, but not initially.
Got it.
Not initially. Okay. I have two props here that I need to.
Here's the control room.
Hello, control room. Oh, should I be not using this mic?
I think he played for it.
Can you hear me now? Testing 1, 2, 3. Give me an affirmation. You might not be sitting at the TriCaster. Okay. That's fine. I'm still just get myself set up here. All right, Andrew, are we ready to go?
Yeah, we're live. We're all set.
Oh, we are live. All right, very good. So I think I'm going to go ahead and take this off, and that'll actually make me feel a little bit better. Wanted to talk a little bit today about physics and music. There are a lot of creative things in making music that are really not related to physics, but there are some things which are absolutely physics related. And one of them is how the sound is produced, and by extension, what pitch that sound is. So I want to, we're going to do a little remedial ear training here, and maybe I'll ask you all for affirmation. I'm going to sing a pitch, and then I'm going to make the pitch go in one direction or the other. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Pitch is going down, pitch is going up. So if that's the pitch, good, good, good. And I'm going to go back to that pitch, and I'm going to go, right? So we all have a general sense of what's going on there. Now, when you may think that, oh, we have a professional musician in here, and we have some amateurs, and we have people who are non-musicians, right? And I don't want to scare anyone away by saying, you know, we're going to do some ear training, and oh, I'm just not good enough, I won't hear that. I think you're going to hear this. So what I want to do is start at the piano, which was tuned a while ago. It's not in perfect condition right now, but it's good enough. I'm going to take one note that corresponds with two strings, and each of those strings we want to have the same pitch, right? So on this note right here, that's actually two strings playing at the same time. You can see there are two strings for that one. Sorry, that one pitch. So I'm going to you're going out of pitch, up and down. So I want us all to listen a little bit closer to what we're actually hearing that's not in tune. One of those strings is vibrating at one frequency and one is at another. And those two not exact vibrations are going to cause interference with one another, and we get what sounds like wah, 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 wah. I'm going to play that once again. Now, as I bring it closer to pitch, is it there yet? Not quite. Almost there. Now it's there. It's there, right? So when I did that, I changed the pitch ever so slightly, and you'd be amazed at what our ears are able to perceive. Our ears are able to perceive the slightest changes in pitch. Now we're going to do one of these on the organ. So there are two strings on that one note. So we're tuning what we call two unisons. It should be the same pitch. Same thing happens at the organ, but we have different stops. So if we have one stop, you pull out one stop and play a D. We also have another register that we can add on to that, maybe pull on another register. Play them together. So those are two registers that are tuned alike. So I'm going to go back in the chamber, and I'm going to tune an oboe note to the 8-foot diapason. Hopefully it's in tune right now, and I'm going to make it out of tune. And I really want you to listen for those beats, the interference. Okay, Joe, can you play that same D on the oboe? And now that's tuning a unison. Are we still all on the same page about this? This hopefully is going to be the part that we all sort of understand a little bit, because we're going to get into some other areas where it's a little bit more challenging to hear them. That was a unison, the same exact pitch. Now we're going to go to something called an octave. If you think back, if any of you were here for a presentation that Joe did in February at Temple Bethel, he talked about Pythagoras discovering, or at least writing down and letting us know about it, that ratios exist in music, right? So the ratio of that unison was 1 to 1, right? The ratio of an octave is 2 to 1. So this note right here is twice as long as that. It's the same pitch, it happens to be D, and we play them together, we recognize it as the same pitch. Very much different than, definitely not the same pitch, definitely not the same pitch, but there it is. They're what we call an octave apart, right? Almost everyone in the world agrees on the tuning of unisons and the tuning of octaves. Where things start to get a little bit squirrely is when we have fifths. A new relationship. If that 2 to 1 relationship was an octave, the ratio for a fifth is 3 to 2. 3 to 2. And so this is what a fifth sounds like. This is the octave. And a fifth has a very, our ears perceive it wildly when it's perfectly in tune as one of the purest things that you'll hear in your ear. Yeah. Let's hear a fifth on the organ.
A DA?
Yeah.
Maybe a GD.
It sounds like it's in tune, doesn't it? But if you listen closely, you are going to hear a wow, 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 wow. Play again. Wow, 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 wow. And tuners will actually count those wah-wahs, which they call beats. If you don't hear a beat, that fifth is going to be acoustically and by the laws of physics completely in tune. We hear fifths and octaves in a very similar way. But here's something that's a little crazy. If there is no perfect way of tuning in fifths and arriving at the same destination when we get to the other end of the keyboard. Now, what I mean by that is, if we start here, that's a fifth. And we go from here to here, that's another fifth. If we go from here to here, that's another fifth. Here to here, a fifth. I'm going to take this note, and I'm going to drop back down and register. It's only, and we did agree on octave tuning, right? So we're going to assume, and then from there to there, that's a fifth. From there to there, there to there. I've arrived back at C. We've gone around what we call the circle of fifths. On the piano, that works. The piano is not tuned perfectly to that 3 to 2 ratio. If you were to tune to that exact ratio you would not wind up at the same spot. So, and you wind up what they call about 6 cents off. So the difference between that is this. 6 cents higher is. Did you hear that difference? Maybe not. I'm going to do it again. We're going to do this a couple different ways. For the online people, maybe I should put this up in the microphone. Now this. Ever so slightly different. Now, what it is. This doesn't work on one device. So now I'm going to use 2 devices and play the first pitch on this device and the second pitch on this. Now, I have to unmute myself, so if my phone rings, I apologize. All right, so we're going to do that pitch there. That's as loud as I can get it. Now let's do them together and see what happens. This might fail me. We'll see. So you hear that beat, right? Which means that if we were to play, it wouldn't have arrived at that same location. This is a peculiarity to instruments like keyboard instruments or even a fretted string instrument. You know, one like a guitar has a fret on it. You set the tuning of it before you start playing. You can't all of a sudden in the middle of the piece adjust that note a little bit. A violin can, right? They can just move their finger one direction or the other. But keyboard instruments, you are locked into whatever the instrument has been tuned at that point. So, how do we solve this, and how do we make sense of a physics equation that doesn't add up and make sense on the keyboard? We have, sorry, where am I? Here's one option. We can modify everything slightly so that it sounds pretty much like a fifth, but it's never going to be a perfect fifth, and everything then does line up at the end. That's what this keyboard is over here. That's what we call equal temperament. We've taken an interval, or a ratio, as it would be in physics, and we've tempered it, or modified it, just slightly. Or we could take that place in the circle of fifths that doesn't match up, and we can place it in a remote part of our key structure that you're probably not going to use that often. By that, our organ over here, I think we can do this. If you would play G flat to D flat.
The unison notes?
Yeah.
Or chords?
Just G flat to D flat together. And play them together. Well, they're actually working. How about D flat to A flat? Should have come up with a better example for this one. Let's and I'll explain why. Let's do a major third, and I'm going to get into that. Can you play D to F sharp? This is a major third. Sounds in tune, right? Now D flat to F. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. Right? And we're gonna use that example in just a little bit, where one key signature works and one doesn't. So an option for sorting through this physics is that we take those notes that don't really, the intervals that really don't sound well, we put them at a remote place where we probably will never have to use them together. right? So that's what we call an irregular tuning system. And people have used that to great advantage. Johann Sebastian Bach wrote a set of songs called the Well-Tempered Clavier. The first one happens to be in C major. The next one that he writes is in C sharp major. And he uses that on an equal tempered instrument. It makes much less sense than it does if it has an irregular tuning system, because it will take each one of those keys and give them a different personality. And each one of them will sound a different way. I want to go back when we were talking about pure fifths. We hear these fifths a very similar way to the way we hear octaves. So we hear, it's a very open sound, right? A fifth. And then together. It still has a very open quality. I'm not adding in any other harmonies, for instance, like thirds, which change it from this to, or from this to, right? So the goal with tempering something like this piano is to make it sound like a fifth. We all in this room, including me, think that sounds like a fifth, right? It's actually not a perfect fifth. It's pretty darn close to a perfect fifth. Now, at this point, I sort of want to stop and say, has anyone heard that there is such a thing as the incapability of perfect tuning? Maybe we assume that we can just call the piano tuner and it's perfect, right? Or we hope after they're done tuning. I'm reading and by the way, we're all in the same boat. I only learned of this by chance when I was looking at colleges, and I went to Oberlin College, which has about 20 organs on campus. Actually, I think it's up to 24 right now, and one of them, in particular, is tuned to a very specific temperament. It's called quarter comma mean tone. But most professional musicians don't realize that we have these tuning things to go over. If we lived 400 years ago, you would be almost in a political battle if you were a musician about what temperament you were going to use. There was no agreement of whether we should be using quarter comma mean tone. A couple of the other ones are Velati and Werkmeister 3, or we did know back then about equal temperament. And actually equal temperament was known about, or it was at least written about in the 4th century BC. And it didn't start to become much talked about or much used until the 1700s. So clear through the 1600s, depending upon where you were, what musicians you were working with, depended on what sort of a tuning system that you were going to use. I've been reading a book on temperament by Ross Duffin, and he's a teacher at Case Western in Cleveland, and he writes that what we're used to, call that conditioning. Right? So we think that that's a perfect fifth because we've been conditioned to. We also think that this is a perfect third because we've been conditioned to. He also says that we don't know about these perfect intervals. He calls it ignorance in the truest sense of the word. We just don't know about it, right? he goes on a bit. I like how he sort of categorizes these, what theorists have devised he considers delusion. And then he says, change is too much trouble for convenience sake, right? And then he says, and those who just don't want to think about it, well, that's just oblivion. And there is a convenience to it, right? For everyone to have an assumption that you hire an instrumentalist, you put an ensemble together, you assume we're all going to be playing in equal temperament, right? The organ upstairs is in equal temperament. So are this piano and 4 others are in equal temperament. Jenny could respond to this, but I'm pretty sure the carillon is in equal temperament. Maybe, maybe not. Carillons have their own physics situations, right? So, getting back to what Joe was talking about back in February, these physical ratios, 1 to 1, that's the unison, 1 to 2, that's the octave. So I don't scare anyone away. You all know what an octave is. Let's sing it, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Somewhere over the... That first interval, that's an octave. Once again, ready? Somewhere... That's the octave, right? So that's a 2 to 1 ratio. The high note, the lower note that we sang had a frequency that could be viewed as is half as long as the upper note that we sang. And then the 5th is a 3 to 2 ratio. 4ths are interesting. We almost always just pass them over because they're what we call, help me out here, it's the reverse one. An inverted 5th. So, a 5th up or a 4th down yields the same note. We almost just pass over 4ths, but 4ths are actually a good topic for a different day. And something that I would love to get into today is to talk about the 3rd. The 3rd is a 5 to 4 ratio. Roughly, it's not going to be exact on the piano. Right? The continent of Europe, starting in probably Greece and then working its way north, was very largely concerned with unisons, 5ths, 4ths, octaves. And these were the basis for Western music for centuries. Yes, there were 3rds, but they were almost considered dissonances. Like we would consider this a dissonance, and this a dissonance, that a dissonance. That was oftentimes referred to as a dissonance. But we do know as far back as the 13th century that England had demonstrated a predilection for 3rds. In the early Renaissance, while the continent was catching wind of what was happening up there, they called these the New English Harmonies. These sounds were often called sweet and liquid, not airy, like 5ths and octaves. These sounds, someone theorized, filled the chasms between the sonic bridge, that is, octaves and 5ths, of earth and heaven. If the bridge between earth and heaven was the octave and the 5th, it was theorized that the 3rds were filling in the chasm between that. It was something warm and delicious. You would probably consider this sound to be warm versus this sound to be... Right, so we almost sort of take on emotion. Some people even calling this interval the song of the human heart. our society has grown up listening to this third, and it's now just a part of our life. Think about the song Kumbaya, My Lord. Kumbaya, right? That third is heavily ingrained in our experience of music. So with all of these weird things about tuning systems, how is this organ tuned? And this is sort of where my goal of today is to explain something that is very unique about this instrument. This organ has a heavy emphasis on major thirds. Why? One answer that I might give is that is because it is closely related to the origins of the Anglican church music in England. And we think about the music of Thomas Tallis and William Byrd, John Bull, John Dunstable. And this organ is tuned in something called mean tone. And it's really not that mean. It's quite sweet, actually. Don't think that you have to memorize this one, but if you are wondering where mean tone came from, it is the average of the third, which is a whole tone. So that is, it's the mean tone is the whole step in that tuning system. In all honesty, this organ is not in exact mean tone. The thirds on this organ are not exactly pure. They're a whole heck of a lot more pure than they would be on an equal tempered instrument. The same thing happens when you're cycling through the circle of fifths. The circle of thirds is very complicated. Could you play C to E? Incredibly near perfect third. And then we have a third from E to G sharp. Not as good. You start to hear a little bit of the beats in there. And then from G sharp back to C is another third. Not good at all. Not tuned at all, right? And we could start anywhere on this keyboard and go there. So it's not exactly pure thirds, but many of them are darn near close to being perfect. Why mean tone on this organ, or why anything other than equal temperament? So we have a lot of them. We've got, I think I mentioned Velati and Werkmeister. There are a whole bunch of different tuning systems that we might have. There was a guy whose name was Johann Neidhart. This was someone who was well known to Bach. One book states that he was known as a temperament freak. So if you think I'm nerding out up here over this, this guy won a competition in temperament. He had all of these theories about it. He had a theory that there should be a different tuning system for localities. Großstadt, Kleinstadt, Dorf, and Hof. So, or the large city, the small city, the village, and the court, right? And in order of, he thought that the court ought to have equal tempered music, because probably the most sophisticated music and the need to use every different key would be in the court. And then a large city would maybe be a little bit less, and then a small city would be even less, and then he labeled quarter comma mean tone, a very simple tuning system for the village, right? I think about this particular church that has 3 organs. That in itself is unusual. We have the main organ upstairs. We also have a chamber organ upstairs. Both of those instruments are tuned in equal temperament. And I thought, we're getting a third organ. We had a third organ. We replaced that organ when we got this. What might we do that would make this different? And when you have multiple situations, you have opportunities for differentiation. I also thought, sort of in that vein, That this is not like a hotel where every single room is exactly the same. That we go around this incredibly beautiful campus and we see differentiation. The architecture in this chapel is different than the architecture upstairs. What's different about this space? It's smaller. It has Romanesque arches. It doesn't have sort of the Gothic arches. It's a more intimate room, right? And probably in it being an intimate room, this organ is going to, not only by its locational constrictions, it had to fit in that area, but also we probably wouldn't want it much louder because it's such a small room, that it's going to be a small instrument. And what a small instrument might mean is that every single thing on the instrument is going to have to add up and make the instrument have its character and personality. And when we were building this organ, we were thinking, primarily the sounds that we're going to focus on are the continuity, the continuous tone, and the beauty in that tone. And the stop that we hear that probably most apparently on is the pipes that you see right out in front. This is what we call the 8-foot principle. And when someone plays the note and sustains the note, there's just the most beautiful sound comes out. Let's hear one. And maybe going up a scale. It's just breathing life into this room in a very controlled way. It's not piercing our ears, neither is it receding, right? There are some other things that we can do to add beauty to this instrument. What we call articulation of every pipe. So when the pipe initially starts speaking, we hear just a little something. Let's hear a couple of those. Do you hear it? The instrument upstairs, you play a note and you almost immediately get to what will be the continuing tone. It has very little articulation. We could go to an extreme with there. If you go to listen to some Baroque instruments, they have, they're sort of clucking. You can't, if you play quickly, all you hear is, right? You do get to tone. I'm just saying that a bit in jest. But a subtle amount of that is going to give character to each individual note. And then the last thing that we thought about when we were creating this instrument was, what tuning should it be in? And so we agreed on a modified mean tone, which means that we can play in a few more keys than we can play than a pure mean tone system. So, what enhancements does this bring? Right now it's a fact that the thirds on this instrument are tuned more purely than they would be on this equal-tempered piano. And I would say one of them is that when you're not dealing with one of the eccentricities of it, and you hear one of those pure thirds lock in, it is pristine. The sound just locks in, and you don't want it to go away. Let's hear a pure major chord. And that key was?
C major.
Yeah. Versus, which is nice, but it's not locking in. We hear a couple in there. It sounds good enough, but let's hear that again. There's all.
You can even hear the note below. If you listen really carefully, that note is vibrating underneath, created by the interference between the first note and the fifth, which is a sign of purity.
Yeah. There are, if you have perfect consonances, then your dissonances are also going to be quite perfect, right? So our dissonances are going to be as heightened as our consonances. And I'm just going to play a cadence of a piece and see if I can demonstrate this. Heightens the effect then of the resolution. I'm going to play it once again. Right, so that when you actually get to the resolution, it's the comparison and the contrast between those two tonalities that really starts to matter. In fairness, what are the drawbacks? There are. Every tuning system has its pros and cons. The equal tempered system, maybe I could say gets away with mediocrity. Nothing on it is going to be perfect, except the octaves maybe, and unisons. The fifths won't be perfect, the thirds won't be perfect. Every interval on it is going to be modified in such a way that nothing is going to be perfect, and we live with consolation for the good bit of that. And it can deliver beautiful music, right? Drawbacks of mean tone. There are going to be certain keys that we just can't play in. And here's where I want to see if we can, if you want to look in your hymnals or just listen. We sang a hymn last week that was in D flat major. This is what D flat major sounds like on this organ. Versus this, which is here's the D flat major chord here. Play it on there. It's not sounding great, yeah? We have things we can do about that. For instance, we can play it 1/2 step up. It's very easy to read it that way, and then we're playing in D major, which sounds lovely on this organ. Let's hear D major. Back to D flat. Back to D. And we actually probably in practice would not go up 1/2 step, we would go down 1/2 step to C major. You think you can do that one?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Another option, we have a piano down here. We can switch to the piano. Another option, we play it upstairs. There's 3 equal tempered instruments up there. Another sort of interesting thing that we've done on this organ, which we haven't actually used yet, underneath of the keyboard, there's a little panel that has what's called MIDI, M-I-D-I, Musical Instrument Digital Interface, right? So activated right now, but totally not being used, are key contacts underneath of every single one of those keys. But we could hook up a clavinova, or we could hook up a software that sounds like an organ, and we could pump out sounds corresponding to the keys, so the organ itself wouldn't make music, but the keys we'd be pressing the keys just like you would on a clavinova. So if we absolutely needed to have an organ sound in D flat major down here, then that's a way we could do it. That would be an electrical little version of it. So some takeaways from this. It might be a bit to comprehend. One, there's no such thing as a perfect tuning solution. Each tuning system, including equal temperament, has its pros and cons. Yeah? Naturally reoccurring ratios defined in the laws of physics and experienced with our ears are perceptible even to those with untrained ears. Sometimes people say, oh, I really can't hear if that's in tune or it's not. I think we demonstrated today that we can really hear these tuning differences in octaves, in fifths, and then when we did that circle of fifths, one sound on this machine and one sound on my iPhone, we heard those beats conflicting with one another. Another takeaway, this organ is tuned in a unique way. It favors music closely associated with the Anglican church music. Sometimes we experience sonic nuances clearly and cognitively, like they slap us across the face sort of thing. And sometimes we experience them subconsciously, or maybe as a background, or maybe just a different shade of color. And both are fine. I wouldn't expect that anyone would come in this room and just know, right, oh my goodness, that's quarter comma mean tone. Right. But you may think, wow, that's a charming sound. And above all, I just hope that this is maybe an invitation to perhaps listen in a different way, maybe listen a little bit closer and experience something that is truly unique at Christ Church Cranbrook. So thank you all. I'm happy to take questions, happy to do conversation, and we're also, this is the second week in a row we have this cute little portatif organ over here. If we want to pull that out and play, and please make yourself at home on this new instrument. It's a real gift to Christ Church Cranbrook. Yeah. Any questions, thoughts? Yeah, Joe.
So when you tune the piano, you're making the string tighter, and that will change the sound. If you're playing the trumpet, there's a valve that you can make, and you can make the tube longer. How do you tune an organ? You got pieces of metal that are, you can't stretch the metal.
Mm-hmm.
So how is it possible to tune an organ when it's...
I have a box of pipes back there and pull out, and I'll show you.
Why did you ask that?
That's a great question. There's two different ways. This is what we call a flue pipe. And this particular flue pipe has a tuning sleeve at the top of it. So it's another piece of metal that can either go down or up. So effectively what we're able to do is we can lengthen the pipe or we can shorten the pipe. So if we shorten the pipe, the sound is going to go up, right? So I'm going to start, shorten the pipe. Right? Likewise, if we're to make the pipe longer. Right? So that's how we tune a flue pipe. There are stopped varieties of flue pipes. This has a stopper in it, right? That we can push up or down in the column of air. So I'm going to make the pipe shorter. By pushing the stopper in, the sound should go up. Right? There's another kind of pipe. The one that I was tuning in the organ is a reed pipe, and the reason that I was demonstrating on that was because it was closest to me. Right? So I'm going to take what we call the boot off. And this is a reed. And the air is going to go across the reed, and it's going to make the reed vibrate. There's a tuning wire right here that I can move up or down, right? And that changes the length of the reed. And you can tune reeds both on so to speak, on the wire or actually by changing the length of the resonator. So on this, we used this pipe last week. It doesn't create a beautiful sound. It is what it is, but I'm going to push the tuning wire down, which should shorten the length of the reed, which should make the pitch go up. Sorry, Nancy, I'm not aiming at you. I did a demonstration one time up in the choir room, and I blew in a pipe, and a stink bug flew out of it. And I was working with kids, and it was all lost after that.
I went up at my house.
Duck.
Right. Again, not pretty, but.
Okay, follow-up question. Okay, if you're a cow. Given that you can tune these individual pipes, if next year you decided this tuning of this was a mistake, we should have really made this mean tone, could somebody come in and tinker with it and turn it into a mean tone instrument like the one upstairs, if they wanted?
So this instrument is in mean tone,
Oh,
the other way around.
Yeah.
So, well, that's a great question. So what if the next director of music comes in and says, I don't know what Christopher Wells was thinking about this. This is ridiculous. I did ask that question to Cassavant before we went down this road. It would be a nominal expense, and it could be done. Yeah. So what they would probably have to do is slightly repitch the instrument. I didn't want to get into it too much today, but there's another kind of tuning. Maybe I could demonstrate on this pipe, which is called cone tuning, where there's not a sleeve on this pipe. And actually, you either take the top little bit of metal and flare it out, or curve it in, and that shades the pipe to be the correct tuning. So once you cut the pipe to length, you've cut the pipe to length. It's time consuming to solder on another 1/4 inch of metal, right? In that event, what they could do is actually put a sleeve on the pipe and then tune it at that point. One of the benefits of cone tuning is that we call our organ technicians less. They set the tuning of it, and this room is very stable in temperature, and we just don't touch it. There are a couple pipes in there which are not cone tuned that we will have to have maintenance people come in and address. But for the most part, this organ its tuning is locked in. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, Rich.
Earlier, you mentioned the carillon. How do you tune a bell?
So some things that affect pitch on a wide variety of instruments, right? Mass is involved. That's one thing, and length, and size, and tension. In a bell, you're sort of working with mass. And I'm not an
Once it's made, aren't you pretty much locked into whatever?
Theoretically, yes.
Okay.
But could you not also carve away some of that material? That's not a job that you want to do on site. Right? That's a job that's done at the foundry. Yeah. Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, so I'm wondering what the benefit is of having a circle of fifths. You gave a really good explanation of what it is. Is it just so that you could determine based upon a particular note what the fifth for that is? Or is there more to it than that?
I think I understand your question. A circle of fifths exists. Well, what if I wanted to play this made-up piece of music? I'm sorry. There's. Let's see if that helps the clip. and I wound up at C major, so that you're not staying necessarily in the same key for ever and ever and ever. That you can modulate into different areas. You know, like this hymn in E major. I just modulated into B when I actually started in E major. Right, so it's giving me a musical direction with something. On an equal tempered instrument, there's you can do far more than move around in circles of fifths or in related keys to that. You can use what's called enharmonics, right? So that this pitch right here might work well with C major. And then we might move to it's functioning in a different way on that.
If I may,
Yeah, please.
you'll hear how differently they function in temperament here, right? You have the C major versus the A flat major. Same pitch, but it functions totally differently because of the circle of fifths.
To pick but one example, Gabriel Fauré. That was the example I was thinking of because he winds up on a C in the Lux Aeterna movement, I think. That's what it is, of his Requiem, right? Moving from C major to A flat major, unheard of in previous times of musical history. That was sort of an innovation of its time, which doesn't work on this organ. It simply doesn't work. Can I ask how many times we would do a requiem with an orchestra and soloists and choir in this chapel? Probably never, right? Right? I don't know. Was that an answer to your question? Maybe I'm not understanding it completely.
It sounds as if it helps you move through a piece with different pitches that are complementary.
Absolutely, yeah. And so I love Christopher's answer. It was, when I heard the question, I was coming at it from a totally different tack. So I'm just gonna, I think Christopher looked at the functional tack about how it works in composition and how it works in the way we hear music. From the theoretical perspective, the circle of fifths for tuning serves a very functional purpose. When you think about Pythagoras, going back to what I talked about in February, the simple ratio of 3 to 2 is something that we can easily calculate. When I think about these ratios, I think about high school geometry class. Remember you had your protractor, and you would have to create complicated geometric measurements just using the simple ratios and combining the ratios. So there was music practiced, which always included thirds. And even when you look at Greek music from the time, you had something very similar to a modern scale. But the pure music, the theoretical music, was a separate thing, and that's what tuning systems developed from the simple ratios themselves. So the point of the circle of fifths is the fifth is the 3 to 2 ratio, and you can calculate these other places. Well, as Christopher said, they never lined up theoretically. And eventually this well-tempered system was a way to kind of reach a compromise, and eventually the practice caught up with the theory, which was starting to make some compromise. So why do you need a circle of fifths? Because there was no such thing as a half step or a whole step in a simple way of calculating it. Because to get there, you had to multiply ratios and you would get to irrational numbers, right? Or an irrational number, we start to think of decimal points. That's not the way they thought back then. They thought, okay, I have a line and I can bisect it, right, with my protractor. So that's, theoretically, you have a circle of fifths because you didn't have a more complicated mathematics. The practical side is more fun than the theoretical side.
This organ is then, I think, one of maybe 4 in the state of Michigan that's in a unique, something other than equal temperament. So it's quite a unique thing that we have here in this chapel. And I think it's because of our unique situation of having multiple chapels. We say we have one church and 3 chapels, right? It's amazing that this place has four altars. Anything else? Yeah, John.
Are you personally able to tune any of our instruments, and what type of training is required?
Right. I'm not an expert in that. I guess through my training, I had to do ear training and hone my ear to hear different things. And but I did that in a different way than tuners do that. You would not want me to tune a piano. I can tune. What I do is I tune a note on a piano. If one particular note just sounds awful, and there's an upcoming performance in 25 minutes, then I can tune that note. And we do, as organists, we do that. We'll go into the chamber and tune a note.
Sort of triggered another question. Let's suppose you have your organ tuned and you put it in the guy. What does he use to tune it with? If you've got frequency components that aren't, right lined up, is he doing it by ear? Is he doing it by instrumentation?
It's a combination. It's an interesting question, right? So, okay, fair enough. Like now, many tuners will come in with an electronic thing that just, you set it to what frequency and you tune it to whatever that thing is humming, right? Before that, what they would do is listen for beats, and count how many beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, happened in the period of 1 second, right? And so let me see if we can hear any beats on here. Not too many. Let's hear it on the organ. We were hearing good beats from fifths on that. So, and that's happening at a ratio, and tuners get good at counting how many beats happen and how fast the beats are happening, and they know towards the goal that they're trying to reach, whether that's too fast or too slow, and adjust accordingly. And that's an art. That's a huge art.
If I may, that thing you said earlier about the German theorist, the tuning competition winner, the temperament winner, when he's talking about a country church using we would call more complex tuning, a tuner could listen in a mean tone situation and just go around in a circle of fifths and tune all of the fifths purely, and because you don't have to worry about the art of the beats. It could be someone who doesn't tune often. In your village church, maybe it's once a year, and it's one of the farmers who has a little knack for this. But then you would have an imperfect moment, because no system's perfect. The Germans call that the Wolf, which means the wolf, right? Which means there's a gap. And so there's an imperfection in a different spot.
And
so
why?
That explains
because it howls. Listen to it on here. We would not want to sing along to.
What would you suggest? D5 again?
Sure. Wow. Yeah. So that would be called a wolf interval, because it's howling. Yeah, Nancy.
How often do you get the instruments tuned?
Probably not enough. It's budget related.
Multiple times a year?
So this organ, it's in its settling in period. It was literally just finished in October, right? So it's in its settling in, and we've had some things, and probably over the next couple years, we're gonna see if there are any problems and be able to address those. And after that, probably 30 minutes a year. Yeah. Now, like this particular pipe right here, it's lined with felt. And is gravity going to allow this to go down, or are you actually going to need to forcefully push it down? If gravity is going to let it go down, that means that sort of this felt way of holding the cap on is too loose. And they can pack more felt into it and make it just a little tight enough that it's not going to fall by gravity, but that you can still move it up and down when the tuner comes. Interestingly, in New York, they have to deal with subways and the rumble of subways under many churches, and that has enough to let a cap go down. We don't have that issue here. But once this organ is settled in, it shouldn't take that much. The instrument upstairs is not cone tuned, and that gets tuned at least 2 times a year, sometimes up to 4, and many off chance visits.
How about the pianos?
Twice a year, except for the one in the church, which is tuned maybe every 4 to 6 weeks. Anyone have a piano at home? Yeah. When you call your piano tuner, do you say, "Can you please come and tune my piano in equal temperament"? Yes, equal,
We
please.
will now.
Yeah. Please come play the organ. Play a couple of notes. Take a look inside. I'll open up the chamber.